and see if, as a result of human emissions of greenhouse gases, there has been a change in either the frequency or intensity or the likelihood of this particular event having occurred. And so I think that identifying that human fingerprint reaches back a little bit to the methodologies that are being applied in the particular studies. And so it's a great clarifying question. So I appreciate that. I think that for the some of the other events where, again, some of the observational record that we have here from pre-industrial, sort of pre-human influence on the climate can be very challenging. Again, that's for tropical cyclones in particular, and some of these storms that may only be a 1 in 100-year event, while the observational record before that is actually quite poor for some of these events, and so they rely much more heavily on the models that we have today to try and reproduce and simulate these events and understand whether or not climate change may or may not have played a role. So again, it really that terminology and that phrasing really goes back to that primary methodology that's used in attribution science of the world with and without greenhouse gases that were emitted by humans.
This is Marty Hurling. Just a quick add-on to those excellent points from Stephanie, because let me pull back the curtain on how some of these studies go about doing the assessment of the human influence on an event. And quite a few, not all of them, but quite a few use a model architecture. They use climate models. And what they did is they would use a model that was driven with all of the factors best known at the time of the event that was at play and influencing potentially the event outcome, whatever that event may have been. And then they would have run a control, what we call a parallel experiment, in which virtually all the same factors are in play, except it's a counterfactual world. It's a world in which climate didn't unfold. And then those two simulations in an industrialized world are intercompared for the statistic of the event under scrutiny, whether it's a heat wave or a flooding event. And it's the comparison of those statistics that then leads to a judgment as to what the potential effect has been of the progressive human-induced climate change over time. You can imagine the complexity of doing that. And you can imagine that the different models that are available and the different assumptions on what the history of the human influence has been leads to this uncertainty that we speak about, that word that you hear and wonder, well, what do you mean when you say uncertainty? Well, I just pulled back that curtain for you. The uncertainty should be pretty self-evident as to why it's a complicated science that's still unfolding.
But just a follow-up, if I can, did the report talk about, I guess if you could talk about the fact that it mentions, choices that we in the case of the drought in Brazil, it was increased water usage, and I think in the case of the Canada floods, there was some attribution sort of given to sort of how the water was being mitigated.
Sorry, I didn't fully understand the question here.
It seemed like the report suggested that there were also sort of not just greenhouse gases, but there were also other factors such as, choices that we're making in terms of, how much water we're using and what we're doing with, in terms of land use.
Right, and I think that I pointed those out in particular because those are novel to this year's report. We actually have not seen that type of integrated analysis of looking at multiple human influences on the environment, whether it be through climate change or through land use. So those were new this year, and for me personally, I thought they were quite exciting because I think ultimately when you have decision makers in these communities or in these nations and trying to understand, well, what does that mean to say that this event has become more likely due to climate change? Okay, it's become more likely, but how does that interact with the other drivers of my exposure risk to these extreme events? And to the extent that we can start, there clearly are other drivers of event risk. And for even heat waves, you have things like the urban heat island effect, et cetera. So to say that the radiative forcing due to climate change is the only influence on extreme event exposure risk is I think probably not accurate for most extreme event types. So to the extent that we can start integrating the attribution science and the radiative forcing piece with these other elements that are changing people's risk to extreme events, that I think that we're providing a more holistic understanding and improving the information base decision makers have access to. So I personally am excited to see more of that type of work being done in the future.
Could I just make a quick point about heat waves? Because notwithstanding these important scientific uncertainties we've talked about, as Stephanie said at the start, we have pretty robust evidence around temperature, and this accords with our understanding of what a gradual, a rise in the mean temperature means for the extremes. And there's a number of findings across the report. For example, there's a paper on the Argentinian heat wave of December 2013 that found that the chances of that heat wave have increased by about a factor of 5. There's another paper about China that talks about a factor of 11 of the high temperatures, and there's a paper about the Australian heat wave where in January 2014 they broke records with an extended period of heat, 5 consecutive days above 42 degrees C, and that was the time when the Australian Tennis Open was on, if you remember, and there were professional tennis players unable to cope with that level of heat. And one of the points here is that these are where thresholds and records are being broken, and the nature of climate change means that the risk of exceeding those thresholds at which you may get impacts, not just fainting tennis players, but other serious impacts being experienced, has increased substantially. We've got quite a lot of evidence about that, and there we do have the models and the understanding to make some quite, as Stephanie said right at the start of this briefing, to have some good, strong evidence that climate change is affecting the risk of the actual individual heat waves that we've been observing.
Thank you. We have one final question. Operator, please cue it up.
The final question will come from Nicholas St. Fleur with the New York Times. Your line is open.
Hi, yes, and thank you so much for putting this press conference together. I just have a quick, simple question. I'm just looking for a concise answer. And Stephanie, I know you already answered this, but I would love to ask it again. Why exactly, for our readers, why is it important that this report presents a mixed bag of results?
Well, I think that there's, I don't necessarily know if it's important that we present a mixed bag so much as that's what those are the results of the work. But I think it's important to communicate that, yes, climate change is absolutely is here, and it is having real impacts on events that people are experiencing in their lives and are having consequences on our economies, our livelihoods, and that's absolutely a reality of the world we live in. However, it is important to also understand that as Marty pointed out, while we have some of these basic trends and understanding that yes, overall global extreme precipitation will rise, that when it comes to those events that we are experiencing in individual events, it's not always good to jump to the conclusion that climate change played a role in the event. It does not diminish the fact that climate change is happening, and it is having impacts. Is it having impacts uniformly across the globe in everything that we see and do? At this point, not in a measurable way. And even if you were to argue that, well, the climate has fundamentally changed, therefore all events that happen within the climate have fundamentally changed, I'm not sure that that's actually helpful for decision makers to say that. Because to simply say, yes, your risk of heat waves has increased, uniformly. I think there we have, as Peter mentioned, we have confidence. People should be able should take that information and consider it when they're making choices about how to invest their resources and about what kind of future they want to have for their communities. But again, for something like precipitation, there will be regional variations, and there will be differences based on where you live, and we don't necessarily have a really robust understanding of how individual communities may or may not be impacted. And it's that level of understanding that a decision maker really needs. So to simply say to the planet, overall precipitation will increase, how does that impact someone in Colorado versus California in terms of the decisions that they need to make? And that's why this type of work is important. And again, it does matter what event type that you're talking about. And so we don't want to come out with a message that says, well, climate change is happening, and therefore all extreme events are changing, because we're not convinced that that's a useful message from a decision maker's perspective, even if it's true. The message that we're trying to send is, yes, climate change is happening. Yes, it's having an impact on extreme events around the world. But it's important to understand what that really means in terms of the actual risk that specific locations, regions, communities, nations are having to different extreme event types, because they are not all the same.
Just a quick add-on to this. This is Marty Hurling. So one of the lessons from this report and the prior ones is that all that's unusual is not happening because of climate change necessarily. And maybe we've run ourselves a little bit into a bit of a frothing here. In whenever something extreme happens, we immediately jump on the fact that, well, climate change is at its most extreme state at this year, and this extreme event happened in 2015 or 2014, so they must be connected. In fact, that is not necessarily the case, and in some situations, as the report shows, it certainly is not the case. Why is that important? Well, it's important if you think about, if you intervene policy-wise and so seriously begin mitigating by reducing your emissions, what are you going to do to the climate as a result? Will you no longer have these extreme events that are called out in this report? Well, quite a few of them will continue to happen. So that's an important point to be clear about in terms of the decisions one makes. The other one is there are such things as climate surprises. And maybe we've become a little bit naive to think that everything that's unusual and for which we had not been adapted must be climate change, when in fact we only had 50 or 100 years at most of data. And frankly, the most extreme events that nature can throw at us, independent of climate change, is by no means contained in 100 or 50 years of experience. So some of these events are climate surprises, and we should be prepared to be better equipped to deal with such surprises, whether it's climate change or not. That's also an important part of the story.
Thank you, and thank you all for participating in this webinar. If you do have further questions, and particularly if you do have would like to talk to one of the chapter authors directly, please email Katie Matthews, katy.matthews@noaa.gov, or myself, Brady, brady.phill.lips@noaa.gov. And as a reminder, a press release with the link to the report can be found at www.noaa.gov. I'll conclude with just a couple of save the date announcements for a couple of reports coming up. So tomorrow, NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information will release the U.S. climate highlights for the month of October. So look for that around 11 o'clock or so tomorrow morning. And then on November 18th, the global climate highlights for the month of October will be released. So again, have a great day. This concludes the call. Goodbye.
Again, with that, we'll conclude today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time.
And I've also been able to fly that on my space shuttle mission. I was the guy that turned it on and checked it all out at the beginning of the flight, top of the atmosphere, which the balloon will do, and that's part of the radiation that the aircraft from flying much lower in the atmosphere will compare the radiation to the top of the atmosphere, which the balloon will do, after all, RADx to the radiation to learn about how radiation is flying much lower in the atmosphere will experience. Pilots, flight crews, and passengers like us will fly is helping us to learn about how radiation
you can't get away from the instrument because you were actually helping out the RADx team in the air today by turning on the instrument.
That's right.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. We really can't get away from the instrument because you were actually helping out the RADx team in the air today by turning on the instrument.
That's right.
We're here
with John,
with
thank you so
Norman,
much
who's
for
a
joining us
member
today.
of
We
the
really appreciate your
science
time.
team
Know
for
your
RADx.
and we'll see you out for lunch.
I understand that what we're looking at for RADx
Ryan
is
Norman,
sort of member
radiation
of the
at very high up
team
in the
for
atmosphere,
RADx, and then looking at it as it changes
that what
as
we're
it moves
looking at
through.
in
So
RADx
how is RADx
sort of
radiation at very high up in the atmosphere?
So RADx is going to fly at two different
then looking at it as it
altitudes. So we're going to
changes
start off
as
at
it
really
moves
high
through. So
altitudes,
how is
and then we're going to
RADx
valve
going to
down.
help us do that?
So RADx is going to fly at two different altitudes. So we're going to start off at really high altitudes, and then we're going to valve down about 12 hours later to get a different altitude. And the point is that the radiation, as it interacts in the atmosphere, changes with altitude. And so the balloon is going to measure at two different altitudes to try to give us two different data points on the radiation levels, and so that we can help build our models better.
Okay, so I understand that there are other assets gathering data sort of at the same time. Does that mean that you have to fly those assets sort of in the same general vicinity as RADx?
We want to be in the same area and fairly close in time. The space radiation environment doesn't change much in time.
Sort of
day to day, it's pretty much the same. So as long as we fly in reasonable temporal vicinity, we'll be good. And we want to be in the reasonable geographic area also. So we want to fly close to where the balloon will be flying.
Once you fly RADx and you get the data from very high to the valve down area to the other assets, what are you going to do with that data? How do you use that to our benefit?
So we want to use this data to develop better models to help characterize the radiation environment in the atmosphere. We want to quantify the radiation received by airline crews, and we have a whole model called NARIS that's set up to do that in sort of real time. And it's built on this notion of terrestrial weather, where we're going to take data in real time from the space environment outside the Earth's atmosphere to hopefully data on airplanes in real time, ingest all that data and figure out what, say we're flying back to Albuquerque to launch RADx-2.
Yeah, right.
And,
good plan,
And we want to know what our radiation dose is on that flight. NARIS gives us that information. So it tells us the dose that, the air crew or the people on the plane might receive at any given moment.
Awesome. Well, I know you're going to get great data. Very excited about it. Thanks so much. And we look forward to good results from RADx.
We're very excited, and hopefully we get off the ground today.
Awesome. Well, we had a chance before we even went out to Fort Sumner to talk to some of the other team members from RADx. Let's check it out.
So Kevin, what's your role in RADx?
So my role on RADx is the project manager. As the project manager, I get to work on a day-to-day basis to keep an eye on our funding, keep an eye on our resources and our personnel, to make sure that everybody on the team has exactly what they need when they need it.
So what you're telling me is you're the top dog.
I am the top dog. I'm the head cheese. So on a day-to-day basis, it's great because as a training opportunity, I've gotten the ability to step up into this role when normally I wouldn't get such an opportunity. But to run the meetings, to lead the team, and get to have them report on up. But then also I do get to turn around and talk to our program office and talk to our other stakeholders to make sure that I keep them in the loop at the same time.
At this point, what's been the most rewarding part?
I've actually gotten to see a lot of growth out of some of the younger individuals who came on board. At the very beginning, with a new team put together, you just never know how things are really going to play out. But looking at the individuals as they've gotten to come along, it's kind of been nice to take some of my experiences, my past experiences, and pass those on to even some of them, even though I am myself a very early career individual. The most rewarding part of the payload coming together is seeing the hardware stuff. The most rewarding part of the payload coming together that leads into doing the hardware mission simulations that we're working on there, and then that leads into doing things like the mission simulations that we're working on.
It's an all-day event. What does that entail?
So for mission simulation, what we do is we get started at 7 in the morning where the team meets around the payload. So for mission simulation, what we do is we get started at 7 in the morning where the team meets around the payload. recent mission simulations, we took the payload do for the day outside. For example, during one of the recent where we simulated satellite, we took the payload. We used the satellites out to the pavilion where we bring the data down in real time, so that we can monitor the health and status of the payload, communicate and bring the data down in real time, so that we can monitor the health and status of the payload. Once the payload is outside, we get set up for the day. We talk a little bit more about what we're going to do. We make sure that everything is set up and running. We talk a little bit more about what we're going to do. We make sure that everything is set up and running, or the science operations center. That is where the data comes down to. So when the data is collected on the payload, it's transmitted up the satellite down to. So when the data is collected on the payload, it is transmitted into our mission operations center. Down to Earth. The individuals in the mission operations center during our simulation are trying to watch the individuals in the mission operations center during the simulation. So are trying to watch. The team gets to spend some time watching the payload. The team gets to spend some time day-to-day watching the payload. That we're using when we actually fly. Commands to the payload and practicing the day-to-day routines that we're using when we actually fly.
So I'm the avionics lead, which means that I'm in charge of all the electronics on the project. So I'm the avionics lead, which means that I'm in charge of aviation electronics on the project. So any electronics that fly in a flight environment, aviation electronics. So in that role, any electronics that fly in a flight environment, making sure that all the science instruments interface appropriately with electronics, making sure that all the data that we need interface appropriately with the electronics that we're collecting on the ground, data that we need, that we're getting all the health and status information that we need on the ground.
Involved in the experiment. So it sounds like a pretty big role because
we have 4 different science instruments that are collecting data. But then to make sure that they're operating nominally, science instruments that are collecting data. But then to make sure that they're operating nominally, and various other measurements that we're making so that we can be sure on the ground, and various actually operating other measurements that we're making so that we can be sure on the ground and so that actually operating nominally.
Once you recover it and then getting it to the science leads? Getting that data from the system once you recover it and then getting it to the science leads?
Our onboard system is actually the main way for recovering the data. So when we recover the payload, system is actually depending on what main way for recovering the data. So when we recover the payload, I'll be involved depending on what state that we get the data different paths we could take. But I'll be involved in making sure that we get the data off and get it to the science team.
Process. Getting involved initially with RADX and up to this point now where you're ready for flight. Getting involved initially with RADX and up to this point now where you're ready for flight.
Especially
how's that experience
coming into NASA? It's been a great experience. So far, my NASA experience is very much been defined by this project. Fresh out. We've had so far my NASA experience is very really great leadership project, and we've had a great really good chance to get hands-on really great leadership working with other disciplines. I've had a really good chance to get hands-on experience working with other disciplines and NASA really taking responsibility. So I've grown a lot as an engineer and as a NASA employee as well.
So what's your role in RADX? So Denise, we have a big launch coming up. So what's your role in RADX?
So part of my task is to ensure that all the components that have been individually designed come together, and we test them in similar environments, individually designed, come together. Then we test them in similar environments, all of our electronics and all our data, and that gives us confidence going into the launch that all of our electronics and all our data is going to
kind of tell us a little bit how you got involved with HOPE part of this HOPE program and your experiences so far. Kind of tell us a little bit how you got involved with HOPE
probably one of the most amazing things in my personal experience that the agency has done. Probably one of the most amazing things in my personal experience that the agency has done. 10 years maybe from concept to launch. RADX really was able to go from concept to launch in a very short period of time. And what that does for us as engineers, young engineers, is give us visibility to the other disciplines. Young engineers, the previous years give us visibility to the other disciplines. Have much exposure to thermal engineering, working on other projects, electrical engineering, avionics exposure, structural engineering, and so electrical engineering, avionics design really gave me an appreciation. And so being able to see that progression really gave me an appreciation.
And joining us now is the chief engineer, Amanda Cutright. Amanda, how you doing? And joining us now is the chief engineer, Amanda Cutright. Amanda, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Today's a great day to launch a balloon.
September 10th was the first date we had a chance to launch it, and now we're here. A long time since September 10th was the first date we had a chance to launch it, and now we're here.
That's right. It looks like a launch day. It is. It's going to go today. I can feel it. It feels like